Thanks, Dagan. Paul Bull, Account Director, Public Sector at EECA. My role is driving EECA's customer-facing program across the public sector. For those of you that aren't familiar with EECA, we're a Crown agency. We have a chair who reports, we have a CE who reports to the chair of the board, and the chair of the board reports to the Energy Minister, Minister Woods. A lot of people will know us as the information enabling agency, and we've had a lot of traditional funding to allow that to happen. And when I say information enabling, we have some grant funding which will help organisations or individuals make informed choices about their energy options going forward. We run the Warmer Kiwi Homes program, which has been a successful program for many years. We've done 300,000 plus homes, and we're targeting another 30,000 homes this coming financial year. We have a transport team that's looking at low emissions transport, and we've been running a successful funding program in the private sector for the last 5 years across that program. I work in the customer facing part. We have a private sector team, which is an organisation of the heavy industry. And that fund is a $70 million fund trying to get large industry to move away from the big fossil fuel burning assets that they've got on site. And that's delivering some great results in terms of, as a program, bringing in the first tranche a lot of big coal boilers out at probably a cost of about $10 a tonne for the carbon emissions it's abating. If you remember to Sean's presentation, he was talking about the carbon market being at $41 as a trading market for carbon. And here we are enabling large industry to take carbon out of the business at a cost of, to New Zealand Inc. at about $10 a tonne. So it seems like really good value for money. The program that I manage and have oversight across is the State Sector Decarbonisation Fund, which sits in as part of the Carbon Neutral Government Program. So EECA is really an enabling agency. If you looked at it, a policy perspective, we're probably the little p on a lot of policy stuff. So we have a lot of input to stuff across government agencies. The Carbon Neutral Government Program, the big P policy owner is definitely Ministry for the Environment, but EECA will be delivering a lot of the programs from a customer facing perspective, and we'll be launching monthly series on that coming up towards the end of July, and the first one will be CNGP 101. I won't call it a dummies guide, but certainly that good starting point for government agencies to understand what they have, and there'll be a series of those programs going forward. EECA also owns the Geneless brand as our communications brand. A lot of people will remember Gerard and melting chocolate bears. Clearly, Gerard needed to have a change of career, and so we found this guy walking the wrong way up some street in Wellington protesting about saying no to wasted energy. If you look at trying to reduce your carbon footprint, the most cost-effective measure is actually looking at energy efficiency first. So say no to wasted energy. Marguerite stole half of my presentation. So Energy Transition Accelerator is a strategic document that enables any organisation in both the public and private sector to have a carbon roadmap, looking at your fossil fuel burning assets and how do you convert those to renewables. I had a kick-off meeting with a tertiary institution last week as part of that process. It's amazing the number of rooms like this that had radiator heating in it, heated by coal, and then there's an air conditioning unit at the top, also going at the same time the heaters are going. Just did my head in, the inefficiency and the waste of energy. So as Marguerite says, when you burn coal, every tonne of coal you burn, that's 2 tonnes of CO2 emissions. Just do the simple stuff first. The graph on the right is the emissions profile across the state sector. So the fund was launched in December 19 as part of New Zealand Infrastructure Upgrade. where the government provisioned 200 million as budget appropriation for EECA to have oversight. We don't approve the projects, we make recommendations, ministers sign off on them. There was notional allocation of that money. So 70 million of the 200 was notionally allocated to health. And when you look at that graph and you look at the emissions profile across fossil fuel burning assets, you can see why a large portion of that is been the 70 million. There was 20 million specifically earmarked for battery electric vehicles in part of that fund. And so great projects like Marguerite got over the line with 150 battery electric into the fleet is not included in that 70 million of notional allocation for health. That 70 million is trying to get at that big bar on the graph and reduce those emissions. Despite what Sean said about, don't do lighting because it might not be part of your profile, it actually is a good activity to do and is specifically called out by ministers as part of the state sector decarbonisation fund. And if your DHB hasn't done a full conversion of LED lights, this fund can help speed that process up. I'm seeing a lot of DHBs, when I talk to the facilities team, are seeing the current fluorescent tube fittings at end of life, a lot of fire risk out there. And so if there's that health and safety risk, this fund can help actually make more happen sooner. I've got a new account manager based out of our Auckland office, and been doing the rounds with him as I've had to fill in between account managers. And he's amazed how quickly, when we sit down to have a conversation, that fleets become part of the conversation, particularly when you look at, on the previous graph, how big the bar was for burning a fossil fuel. And as Marguerite's graph showed, natural gas and coal are the biggest contributors to the emissions profile across DHBs. The funding mechanism through the State Sector Decarbonisation Fund should enable any state sector organisation to be able to buy a battery electric vehicle in place of an ICE vehicle without it costing them any more. That's the intention of what the fund was there to do. It's got a little bit messy in the last couple of weeks because government announced clean car discount, which is great, but can't double dip, got to deal with the money properly. Still looking to fund the balance between the two. And if you have a battery electric car, the other thing that's really important is the thing that you plug it into, otherwise it only works once. And single-use cars definitely are not good for the environment. So there's a funding mechanism there to allow for the car as well. I thought I'd put some interesting stats because I know it's been a particularly long day sitting listening to people talk. So if every household in New Zealand could do 2 less short journeys, 2 journeys under 2 Ks a week, that would be the equivalent of saving 100,000 tonnes of CO2 per year. Or if you're into planting trees, it's the equivalent of 4,800 hectares of trees, which is about twice the size of Rangitoto Island. And so I've heard lots of presentations about needing to shift out of vehicles. If you take that one stat away, aside from going back and trying to influence people to stop burning fossil fuels, that would be a key thing to take away. One of the other key projects that I find is quite interesting that we're doing across the State Sector Fund is we're trying to take coal boilers out of schools. So Ministry of Education got allocated about a quarter of the fund, and I've employed an engineer to work with Ministry of Education, actually going physically out to each of the schools, looking at the coal boiler, writing a recommendation for them as to a renewable option, which tends to be one of about 3 or 4 things that they should put in. So what the fund's trying to do is actually speed up the rate of change and enable state sector organisations to decarbonise. I think we're at about 100 million of the 200, and we've got a little bit of top up in the budget this year. And I think what happened is we picked the low-hanging fruit, those projects that have been kicked around as business cases for 4 or 5 years, and with some co-funding, someone's been brave and said, yes, I'll find the other portion of the funding. If you can't find someone in your organisation that's talking to EECA, find me, Google my name, it comes up many times. I'm on LinkedIn, happy to talk at any stage about the opportunity. We don't want to keep hold of the money. We want to make it happen and reduce carbon footprint across the government estate. Thank you.